Well, we found out yesterday that Mike McCarthy is not returning to the Dallas Cowboys, so it seemed timely that we go through the 2024 Dallas Cowboys season. Let's go. Good morning, everyone. Curtis DeBoy here with you, Muscle Cat Media Network. This is the Outback QB Daily. Today, we're going through the Dallas Cowboys 2024 season. They ended up 7-10 in what would turn out to be, as we know now, Mike McCarthy's last year. He was there for 4 seasons. His first 3 seasons yielded 12-5 regular season records, and they never got past the divisional round. So it was a disappointing playoff return for what was a good 3 years during the regular season. And now they went 7-10. A few people thought he would stay. A few people thought he would go. Turns out they couldn't agree on a contract. Jerry Jones, the owner, and Mike McCarthy to remain at Dallas. And apparently the sticking point was the contract length. So McCarthy's gone. Now that's interesting because as of about now, or probably 12 hours ago, McCarthy's contract expired anyway. So they needed to sign him in that last 24 hours or it was open slather. Now, the Chicago Bears last week requested an interview with McCarthy because you have to do that when they're under contract. You have to request the interview. The Bears wanted him. The Cowboys said, no, we're trying to renew his contract. It hasn't worked out. So now Mike McCarthy's a free man. So no doubt he'll interview with the Bears and maybe with the Saints, maybe elsewhere as well. So I think he'll get a head coaching role. I think he will end up at the Bears. Yeah, I think he'll end up at the Bears. That's my guess. And what a turn of events, coaching against Green Bay in the NFC North. But we'll wait and see. Wait and see what happens. So, how did the Cowboys season go this year? Well, it was a weird one. It went in patches. They started 3-2. They weren't convincing. They went on a 5-game losing streak. Then they won 4 out of 5. Then they lost their last 2. And of course, it was punctuated by the Dak Prescott hamstring injury in Week 9 in Atlanta, which turned out to be quite serious. It needed surgery and ended his season. So they had Cooper Rush from there. We lamented, and all of their fans lamented, their lack of movement in the offseason. Jerry Jones said, we're all in, and it turned out that he did pretty much nothing, and it hurt them. They brought back Ezekiel Elliott. We know that he's a shell of what he was. He was a great running back. He's now just a backup, and he played like that. Eric Kendricks, they brought in as a linebacker from Minnesota. He had a very good season, but he's 33 next year, and he's more of a top-up piece when you're ready to win a championship, not really a middle-of-the-pack kind of guy. They traded for cornerback Andrew Booth from Minnesota, who, if you watched Dallas, every time he played, he got absolutely targeted by other teams, and he did not have a good year. Highlights and lowlights. Well, like I said, they had a run of 4 out of 5 victories just after the halfway point of the season, which gave them some hope and made you think that maybe Mike McCarthy would stay on. Turns out he didn't, but they beat Washington in that time. They beat Tampa Bay in that time, and they only narrowly lost to Cincinnati, and that was without Prescott. So it showed that this still has the makings of a good team that can win games. And another highlight, I mean, this is maybe a bit of a stretch, but I put it in because their running game was woeful for the first half of the year, pretty much the worst in the league. They didn't have anybody, and then it turns out Rico Dowdle, well, he can actually play. He is a competent running back. At the back end of the year, he went 4 out of 5 games over 100 yards. And did you know this is his 5th year in the league? I thought he was 2nd or 3rd year, but he's 26. He'll be 27 next year. So he's probably not their answer, but at least they found the makings of a run game towards the end of the year. Now, that's not a big highlight because there weren't a lot. I mean, Micah Parsons was good again. He had 12 sacks in 13 games, but Parsons is the story always at Dallas, so I tried to find something different. The lowlights, there were a few of those. Obviously, the Prescott hamstring injury in Week 9 was the big one, and whilst Dak wasn't having a great season to that point, he had 11 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. You look at the difference that he makes as far as yards per game, and he was 247 yards per game, so he moves the ball. Cooper Rush, whilst he's very, very competent and went 12 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, and I say very competent as a backup, he was 153 yards per game. So there's almost a 100-yard difference in the air when Prescott plays versus Cooper Rush, and perhaps that's what facilitated or necessitated the need for Rico Dowdle to actually have an extended amount of carries towards the end of the year. So Prescott obviously hurt them. And then that 5-game losing streak, including the game where they were blown up 47-9 by Detroit, and they were also smacked 44-19 at home to New Orleans in Week 2. That wasn't part of the 5-game losing streak, but they were the lowlights. I mean, that completely blew up their season. In the middle of that losing streak, they lose Dak as well. So that's where it all went wrong. Let's have a look at their stat leaders like we have for every team so far. Like I said, Prescott and Rush, I went through their stats. Prescott went for 1,900 yards, Rush for 1,800. Rushing-wise, Rico Dowdle did crack 1,000, which was very surprising. Nobody tipped that, especially at the halfway mark of the year, 1,079. Only the 2 touchdowns on the ground, though. Outside of that, literally nothing. Ezekiel Elliott, 226 yards, and nobody else got more than 100. Receiving, CD Lamb, 1,194 yards. Wasn't his biggest year. He missed a couple with injuries, 6 touchdowns, but still their most prolific guy. Beyond that, Jalen Talbot, 610 yards, 7 touchdowns, which is not bad, but they do need some help there. Jake Ferguson, their tight end, played 14 games for only 494 yards and no touchdowns. Kevontae Turpin played all of the year, only 400 yards. Brandon Cooks played 10 games, missed a lot of time with that leg infection, only 250 yards. So they need some help there. Micah Parsons, as far as sacks, he was their big boy, 12 sacks. He always is. Chauncey Golston on the edge, 5.5. Carl Lawson, 5.5. DeMarvion Overshone, second-year player who missed his whole first year with injury. He actually looked pretty good as a linebacker. He had 5 sacks in 13 games. He also had an interception that he returned for a touchdown. So he had a pretty good year. He forced a fumble as well. Micah Parsons forced a couple of fumbles too. As far as the secondary, Trayvon Diggs led in passes defended with 11. Jordan Lewis had a pretty good season with 8. Deron Bland, he only played 7 games, missed the rest of that through injury. He had 5 passes defended. Interceptions, there weren't big numbers. A couple to Mukawamu, a couple to Malik Hooker, a couple to Kendricks, who had a good year coming across from Minnesota, and a couple to Trayvon Diggs. Where did that all land in our MVP? Well, they weren't huge votes. They were 23rd overall in votes as far as team performance, which makes sense. Micah Parsons, clearly their best. He ended with 25 votes. That puts him on top of their leaderboard. More than double. Next place, CD Lamb with 12. Cooper Rush with 12 because he did have a few good games. You forget that. He had a game where he was best on ground. He had a game where he scored 3. He had a game where he scored 4. Lamb polled more times, but just not huge votes. He only had the 1 best on ground himself. Brandon Aubrey had a couple of nice games where he saved them. He ended up on 9 votes. Kendricks, 9 votes. Rico Dowdle picked up 8 in that latter part of the season. DeMarvion Overshone, 6. Osa Adigizua, one of the tough ones to say. Osa Adigizua, the defensive tackle. He did some good things. Chris Collinsworth loves that guy. He froths about him. He had a really good game where he scored 5 votes. Other than that, Prescott had 1 best on ground and ended up on 5. DeMarcus Lawrence, Lewis, Turpin, Martin, Smith, Bland, Marzi Smith, and Tyler Smith, that is, the 2 Smiths, Hooker and Talbot. They all scored votes, but only in 1 game each. So, where does that leave them going into next year? Because, we'll look at the draft class first, actually. We got Tyler Guyton. He was the tackle. He played what I call the Devil's season. He had 666 snaps at left tackle. He did improve as time went on. He started poorly, 4 sacks in his first 4 games, only 1 in the last 6, but his last game was a shocker. He conceded a sack, he gave away 2 penalties, and he got dragged against Washington. He actually got benched, which was not good. Overall, look, he did struggle. He got a fair few snaps. He did have a couple of nicer games, but he was ranked 73 out of 81 on PFF. Yes, tackles take a while to get going, but it was a below expectation season for Tyler Guyton, the number 1 draft pick on that O-line. Marshawn Nealon, the defensive end, he came out flying, 5 pressures in his first game, but he had injuries interrupting him all year and couldn't get going. Round 3, they took Cooper Beebe, the center. He played the whole season, but he was a guard in college, so he had to transition from guard to center. He looked better at the back end, no sacks in the last 7 games. So he's done, I think that's a pass mark for Beebe. At least they've got a center there who looks like he can play. The only other guy I'll talk about is their 4th-round pick, Maris Leofau, who was the linebacker. He played half the snaps this year. He did some good things. He had a 2-sack game. He forced a couple of fumbles. He broke up some passes. So there's definitely some hope there for the second-year linebacker next year. Off-season needs. This is a really hard one to figure out because they have pieces pretty much everywhere, but they're not dominating in many positions. Obviously, they need a head coach now, so where do they go? Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, all those familiar names will come up, but we'll find out very soon. I think the O-line needs some work. Zach Martin, who was once the best guard in the league, he's now 34. He's had a big decline over the last couple of years, so he probably needs to be replaced or at least have a succession plan there. They could do with some competent partners to their superstars. You know, another wide receiver for CD Lamb because he's a star, but he needs some help. Another edge, or whether you want to call him linebacker or edge, but someone else on the edge to complement Parsons. Somebody else who's getting 10 sacks a year to help them out. They've got a couple of bit part players. They need another stud. They need another stud. And despite it being a positive that I mentioned with Rico Dowdle, they probably need a star running back at some point. But, they're a team that they could be, if Prescott's fit from week one and they address these little holes in the O-line and maybe get a bit more force on the D-line, then they could be a team that competes. They're definitely a playoff contention team next year. So for these guys, getting a running back makes some sense. Getting a star running back makes some sense because it can make a difference. It's not for a team that's rebuilding. If you're going to win 3 or 4 games a year, you don't need a star running back. If you're going to win between 8 and 12, which feasibly the Cowboys could, then a running back makes some sense. So let's go O-line, particularly guard and right tackle. Let's go defensive line, someone else on the edge, and let's go the best of a running back or a wide receiver, a skill position player, someone to either accelerate the run game or to assist CD Lamb in the air. That's where I'm going for Dallas next year. No Mike McCarthy, new head coach incoming. Where does McCarthy land? Who do the Cowboys get? What do they do in the draft? Will Jerry Jones actually blow the dust off his wallet outside of the Dak Prescott extension and make some moves, Jerry? This is the time. Make some moves. Help out your new head coach. We'll see you tomorrow.